Hello, hello, hello. My name is Robert. I am the recovery guy, and you have entered into The Fix. Hello and welcome back to Robert, the Recovery Guy, and this special broadcast of Recovery Guy Podcast. This was my friend Billy, who was the featured speaker at the South Davis Recovery Club in Bountiful, Utah. And Billy celebrated 40 years of sobriety in September of this year. And I hope you enjoy him as much as I did. Sit back, relax, and we'll see you after the meeting. Have a great day.
I'll be forever grateful. So, Billy, come on up and share with us, all right?
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks a lot. My name's Billy. I'm an alcoholic. And that's something that I had to know, before I could really become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's that first step. And it took me a while, and we talk about that. It's so our disease is so masterfully described and chronicled in our big book. And Bill Wilson, there was 100 guys. In the beginning of the book, he says the preface to the first edition. We are 100 men who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and wish to share that with all who could use it. And we've written precisely how we have done it, and I don't know. I love that big book, But I'll tell you a little bit about my my drinking and drugging. I was born in 1955, and the party was on. Suburbia. I'm from New York, lived on Long Island, and when I grew up, everybody, there was all new families there. We were the baby boomers, and it was, like I said, the party was on, and there was a lot of kids. There was a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun growing up, but I was a kid that was in trouble really early. I was a kid that was getting high really young. I was getting high like in first and second grade. I discovered, you could sniff glue. I was a glue sniffer. I pulled the fire alarm in fourth grade. I was on probation in fifth grade. I got caught robbing houses. I used to go break into the library. They have a little money from the late books, and we'd go in there. We'd take like the 80 cents and go get stuff. But so I burned a house down. I don't know. I was an adventurous kid. And. I had my probation officer come into the school once a month. Mr. Peterson, I can still remember him. He had that FBI kind of look with the shoes and all. But nobody was allowed to hang out with me that had any sense. If their parents knew who Billy Radigan was, they weren't allowed. They were told, you can't hang around with him. But I loved getting high. I loved feeling different. In sixth grade, we finished the sixth grade up. And we got hold of a bunch of beer. We went up to the local park. I had it figured out because I was sleeping in Vinny Bonamigo's backyard, and so we're in the park, and I got drunk. I got blackout drunk, and I rode my bicycle into a parked car, and I woke up in the backyard. And the sun was coming through the tent, and I had this hangover. My head was stuck to the sleeping bag, and I was thrilled, I was thrilled. And from that point on, then we went to the junior high school, and I was just so thrilled. And, now that I look back, I was so afraid, I always had a lot of fear, but I didn't know any of this. I learned this in AA. So I went through, my schooling years, partying every weekend. That's all I really thought. That's what I thought about mostly: parties, girls, and the fear, wanting to be accepted, not wanting to get caught. I was always guilty, we talk about things in AA like, your feelings or something like that. I couldn't really identify a lot of feelings, but I could identify one feeling. I was guilty. I grew up feeling guilty. If that's my wife, I'm not here. That's what they used to say at the bar. My dad took me into the bar, and the phone would ring. It's like, "That's my wife. I'm not here. I tell her I just left." We'd go out to get gas for the lawnmower, and my dad would take me in, and I'd have a Shirley Temple. But I loved that bar, And I got into the bar when I was about around 16, and I did not look that old. I was long haired. It was so funny. I was thinking about that today too, but I got into the bar. The drinking age was 18 back then, And when I had Randy Roman's proof, and I got into that bar, and I gave them. The guy accepted it, like wink, wink, And he served me my beer, And I was so freaking thrilled, when I was served in the bar. And then I went to that bar, it was a little neighborhood bar, Chris and Vic's Lounge. They had to put plywood up on the windows in the front because there was they got broken so many times that they just gave up on it, It used to be like an old folks bar, and then we took it over, and they didn't know what to do. I mean, it was a freaking mess. There was drugs and alcohol and pot and everyone underage. It was a riot, and we loved it. It was so exciting, and people were dying, here and there back then. But I didn't really notice it. We didn't attribute it to, the drugs, the alcohol, and things like that, And there was a lot of us, and it was a lot of bars, a lot of us, and we had a lot of adventures. And I was talking about, I had a 56 Chevy all souped up, and I drove that thing like a nut job. And I drove that thing drunk all the time. I could drive better drunk than you can drive sober, That's a song. And I'm like, yeah, I could relate to that. But, even when I was 16, 17, I kind of started to think, I kind of felt like I had a problem, a little bit. But I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was just, we were just doing stuff. But I was starting, one of the things that was happening was I was starting to have, I was starting to detox on Monday, Tuesdays, and a couple times I had DTs and stuff, but I did not know that, I did not know that alcohol could kill you. I didn't know, and we did a lot of drugs, and a couple of times I felt very close to death. But when I look back, after being sober for some time, I realized I was close to death a lot more than I ever realized, And I was just lucky I wasn't killed or kill somebody with my drinking and driving. I drove drunk thousands of times. You ever see Seinfeld when Jerry buys a static Cadillac and he goes down to he's at the condos down in Florida and he says, "Hey, you see my son bought me a Cadillac." He goes, "Oh," and his friend says, "I've been in Cadillac thousands of times." Anyway. But you know what? The first time I walked into an AA meeting, I was 19. I had the DTs. I didn't know it. I was up that night. I woke up and I was at my parents' house. And I got up in the middle of the night and there was something weird wrong, And I was looking around in this dark shadowy. There was the boogeyman figures were all around. I'm like, holy shit, And I'm like telling myself, it's not real. And I was gonna go. It was just a really crummy night, I'll tell you. But I made it through the night, and the sun came up, and I felt like, okay. I went over to Walter's house. He was my partner in crime, and I go, we got to do something, man. And he had a lot more DUIs than I had. A couple. I used to get them a lot easier than well, you didn't even get them that easy. You had to really work hard to get a DUI back then. But he says he was court ordered to go to AA, and he goes, "You want to go to AA?" And I was like, "Wow, where did he come up with that?" So we go to the AA meeting in our town. This one, Comac, the big Comac group. So me and Walter walked down. They were long-haired, freaking kids, with the goofy shoes. It just was funny. And we walked into the meeting. It was down in the bottom of the church. And we walked in, and we kind of walked around. There was a bunch of WW2 guys standing around with coffees and stuff. And we kind of floated through the room, and we're like, let's get the hell out of here, And now I knew there was a place, you know. And then I ended up there over the course of the next 8 years, every now and then. And one time, you know, like we'd go there, and I didn't understand what was going on, but on Monday was a speaker meeting, and they'd have someone speak, and we'd be sitting there, you know, they had the chair set up a certain way, and we'd be like, you know, whoa, you know, grandma's wild, you know, whatever, you know. And but we, you know, it was entertaining. I enjoyed it, you know. But then there on Wednesday, it was a step meeting, and there was a table and went around, and it was going around the table. I had no idea what was happening, and it was starting to come. It was going to come to me, you know, and I had no clue. And but I noticed you could say, my name's Billy, and I pass. And so, you know, but up to that point, I was like, I wouldn't know what to say, you know. But so for about 8 years, every now and then I'd find myself down there, but I would recover pretty quickly. I was young. I'd recover. I'm like, maybe I'm overreacting, or whatever, you know. And I would try, and like in the big book, it says, you know, I tried all the different solutions I tried everything I could think of, you know. Drink moosey beer, do only cocaine, you know, do this, that, you know, all of these crazy things, you know. But you know what? I couldn't stop drinking, and you know, the doctor's opinion, he describes the alcoholic, and he does it. I love the way he describes an alcoholic. He says one of the things is, yeah, I love the doctor's opinion, but he says I like when Bill Wilson reintroduces the doctor for the second edition, and he says the physician has agreed to give us some more stuff. He says, and he's got a little bit of a page here, and he says, it didn't satisfy us. He goes, it didn't satisfy us to be told that we could not control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, that we were in full flight from reality, we were outright mental defectives. He goes, these things were true to some extent. In fact, to a considerable extent. And then the doctor goes on to describe the alcoholic, and he says these men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol, and that he says the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. He says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. They are restless and irritable and discontented unless they can experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once by taking a few drinks, you know? And that's that thing, you know? And then he says after they do, and after they succumb to the phenomenon and the craving, and they go through the well-known spree, you know, things and all that shit, and they emerge, and I like this is the part that's very accurate. He goes, they emerge remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over, you know, and that's that baffling, insidious, strange, you know, powerlessness that I've come to learn is part of my disease, you know. I didn't have, when it came to alcohol, by the time I got off to an early start, but by the time, you know, I got to AA, I could not stop drinking. I would wake up Sunday morning and I'd stumble out of bed one time I was in bed, I had a water bed, and it was a basement apartment, and I had a shag rug, and I had an old TV, Magnavox, nice TV, color, 27-inch. And so Jimmy Swaggart, and I said this, does anyone not know who Jimmy Swaggart is? He's a televangelist. He was a televangelist at the time, and when you had regular TV. And he's on there, and it was Sunday, and I was so hungover, so desperate. I had a little bit of, I wanted to be good, and he was like, brothers, you know, God, you know, and he was making a plea and this and that, and I look around a little bit, and I get out of my waterbed, and I walk over to the TV. I was going to put my hands on the TV. That's what he was asking me to do. I walk over to put my hands on the TV. I got like a 9,000 volt shock from the static. I'm like, whoa, whoa, you know. But I was hoping that something miraculous could change me, you know. And he talks about that, you know, in the doctor's opinion too. He says, why, you know, he says, as strange as it may seem, that very same person he says, on the other hand, as strange as it may seem, that to those that do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, that very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them, suddenly finds himself easily able to control a desire to drink for alcohol, to not drink alcohol, you know. And Bill Wilson, the next thing we got is Bill Wilson's story. And when I first came to AA and I read Bill Wilson, I didn't get it. I didn't, you know, Bill, yeah, whatever, you know. I didn't even know who he was. And but now I can identify with Bill Wilson's story through and through. But Sunday morning, so I would go in the bathroom Sunday morning hungover, and I'd walk in and I'd look in the mirror and I'd go and I'd be like, what the hell's the matter with you? My dad would go, when I lived at home, my dad would open my door and he'd go, whoa, I was a tequila drinker, you know, Boilermakers. And he'd go, what the hell were you drinking, you know? But I start, you know, I over time, I knew there was something wrong with me. I wanted, you know, I wasn't good, but I wanted to be good, you know? And then finally, I had my own business. I started a business, and it was successful. I had like 12, 15 people working. I couldn't get out of my basement apartment all week, you know? And Bill, you know, Bill was very successful. He was in World War I, and he led, you know, he did well in the service. He came out, he went to college to be a lawyer, but then he got involved with Wall Street, and he made a lot of money, and he had a lot of friends, and they were out drinking and whatnot. And but what happened was he's an alcoholic, and back then they didn't have AA yet. He didn't invent it yet, you know. But and he went to different things. You know, he tried everything. And one of the things, you know, he come out, and him and Dr. Silkworth spent a lot of time together psychologically, you know. And he says, it relieved me somewhat to learn that alcoholics, that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, I did really, really good. I went to town regularly, made money. He says, surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. Next paragraph, but it was not. You know, for the day came, that frightful day came, and then it got worse and worse, you know. And it got really, really bad, and he goes through a couple of days of really, really bad. And then I like this one line. He says, you know, no words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched all around me in all directions, and I had met my match. I was overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And then he says, I'm looking for it, I don't see it, but he says, he goes through all the stuff, and then he goes, in time, it got worse. You know, and then his friend comes over, you know, who was perhaps worse than he was, and he was like recovered. He came to give the message to Bill, and it was an Oxford group, you know, kind of thing. And Bill was aghast because it was you know, this higher power and this God, you know, thing. He goes, I was shocked but interested. Certainly, I was interested. I had to be, for I was hopeless, you know, and then he goes through things. And I like this part where he says, to Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teachings most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult. The rest I discarded, you know. That was, I could relate to that, you know. But his friend, and he's got the whole program in Bill's story, you know. I love it because his friend comes over and they go through the program. And then and then he goes and makes amends, and he does it pretty handily. And he says, I was to test my new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt and ask only for his direction and strength to meet my problems. He says, never was to pray for myself. And then he says, my friend promised me that when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator, and that I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid, and it meant destruction of self-centeredness, you know. And that's and he goes through the book and comes to how it works, and they go through what we read today, and you got the 3 pertinent ideas. Then he says, you know, we're at step 3, and that is that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success, you know. And that's the lesson that I had to learn in AA, you know. So I came to AA. I woke up this one morning. My girlfriend was living. I was trying everything to be sober. My girlfriend was living with me. She was working with me. You know, I was trying to put all of these things in. I went out on a tow. I got drunk. I went to this other guy's body shop, beat up a guy who used to work for me, broke all the windows, and then fell asleep on his desk. And then my girlfriend informed me that night was DUI class night, and I was going to miss it. And I go, I can't miss it. And so she took me there, and I thought I could, you know, kind of pass off, you know. I got thrown out of the DUI class. They sent me to a psychiatrist. They thought I was mentally irregular. And, you know, I heard a song. There was a Willie Nelson song this morning, and I heard it, and I really identified with it. So when I came into AA, I had the DTs that weekend. And I was waiting for Monday because that, you know, and I went down to that group, and I didn't. And as I was walking down the steps there, I was screaming inside my head, "Somebody help me! Somebody help me!" So I went down to that group, and I walked around, but nobody said anything to me, you know. But I didn't say anything to anybody either. And I tried, you know, I was probably looked okay, you know, but I almost made it out clean. And the guy was cleaning, John McGrath was cleaning the table. And he goes, "Hey, how you doing? John McGrath." You know, I tried to answer him, and I just fell apart, you know. And he talked to me for a while. And he says, "Hey, can you stay sober tomorrow?" I was like, "Yeah." "Give me a call. We'll go to a meeting." I was like, yeah, you know. And when I left there, I remember I felt like, hey, maybe I'll be okay. Maybe I'm just an alcoholic. This morning I heard a song, and Willie Nelson, one of the lyrics, and he says, he goes, "I'm crazy." He goes, "But I didn't know, I'm not sure if I'm all the way crazy." And you know, when I walked out to that meeting, I knew I was crazy, but I didn't know if I was all the way crazy. And when I left there, I had hope. You know, and we talk about that. You know, we share our experience, strength, and hope with each other. You know, one of the things in the first in the first preface, in the first to forward to the first edition, you know, he's got the preamble in there. I hadn't noticed it till just like he says we are not an organization in the conventional sense. This is the book before AA meetings, right? But there was a few. But there are no fees or dues whatever. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We are not allied with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. We shall be interested to hear from those who get results from this book, you know. And, you know, I didn't know anything about AA, but John McGrath, you know, I called that guy the next day. He was a New York City detective. I was this, like, punk kid. And I called him, and it was a home phone. You know, we didn't have cell phones, but it was a home phone, and his wife answered, you know. And I was so, you know, it was so, you know, it was so uncomfortable, but I was willing, you know. He asked me to do that, and I told him I would, and I did it. And then I met him at that meeting. I seen him in the meeting, and I walked up to him. I stood next to him, you know. "Hey, John, how you doing?" "Oh, hey, Billy, how you doing? You doing okay?" "Yeah." I'm like, "Yeah," you know. And I would go, you know, I would go to meetings. He went to a lot of meetings. I would go to the meetings with him, and I'd always go stand next to him, you know. "Hey, I'm with John. It's okay, I'm with John," you know. And he would be talking to me, you know, and I, you know, we didn't get into a big study of the big book, me and my sponsor, you know. I just needed to stay sober, you know, and I started staying sober, you know. And that Comac group that I belonged to, that John belonged to, we would wash the floors every night. It was a big room downstairs, and we'd put everything away, and then we had those big mops, you know, and he would take you after, you know, and I would mop that floor, and I was proud, you know, I did a good job, you know. I was there about a few months, and Pat, the secretary, came over, and she had her book, and she goes, "So, Billy, what do you have, about 3 months now? What's your," you know, she put my sobriety date in, you know. And at that moment, I I felt like I belonged to that group. Hey, she knew my name, and she noticed I was here. And that was good. And then I had a couple of months, and then I had a few more months, and then I had like maybe 8-9 months, and then I'm like, wow, pretty soon it'll be a year. We didn't have chips back then. We got a lighter. Everybody smoked. And it was ridiculous. And so you got the Zippo lighter, and they would engrave it, and on mine it says, "But for the grace of God." There go I, but for the grace of God. And I don't even know why I put that on there. And then it has your sobriety date and your name, and then they put a star on it for that year. And then every year you give it to, put a star on it, and you started to, but that's what we did back then. And everybody smoked, and when they started to go to non-smoking, boy, that was fun. You think this election was tough? But, I have, so, and now I'm pretty familiar with our literature now, and our book. And you know what? I haven't found anything. This book is so unbelievable, and it's really quite amazing how Bill was able to put this together, and he was determined to kind of chronicle what they had. He was so enthusiastic, and out of work, and but he really did like a really unbelievable job of analyzing the alcoholic, and step 3, being concerned, we're convinced we're at step 3, which is we decided to turn our will over life for care. We understand just what do we mean by that, and how do we do it? He says, well, the first thing is that we understand the idea that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. So, and then he goes on to describe, the alcoholic and the type of things, and he says, selfish self-centeredness, that we think is our problem, and fear. I learned so much about myself. The psychology of our book is so amazing, but we have something that other self-help books don't have. We have that secret friend. We have that higher power. Viktor Frankl has a book that people like a lot. It's A Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he's a psychiatrist guy. And he says there's a space between stimuli and reaction. There's a space that there's a pause between something and responding to it. And he says, and in that space is all our ability to change. And that's very profound. People thought that was very profound. But he's missing something, and we have it. And it says we pause when agitated, and we ask God to help us make the right response. Excuse me. And that's a big deal, all right. And then and that's in the reading, that's in the instructions upon awakening. It says, upon awakening, let us think about the day ahead. Consider our plans for the day and ask God to help us. When I ask for help, I get it. And one of the things is, and he spends a lot of time with that, and he says. And before he gets into how it works, he's softening us up for this, this idea that we need help. There is a solution, and the fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice to make that choice. Just like the doctor, has said. He says, we are without a defense against the first drink, He says, there is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching and leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others. And that's what I saw in AA. And that's what I really observed when people come into AA. There's a wonderful thing that happens when a newcomer comes into AA, and it's funny when in that Comac group, I never really considered that those people were as screwed up as I was at one time. They all seemed like pretty good people. My sponsor was a cop. He seemed very intelligent, very very sensible. He got his guns taken away, shoot him off in bars and shit. But we see people that come into our program, and it's just amazing. It's miraculous, so he says what we saw it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of the life we had been living, and that's kind of what we, that's how we get here, and when if we get here, we usually got that, it's like I need a better way to go, and so this whole, before it gets into how it works, it really gives a lot of things to consider and to identify with, and it talks about the different ways we try to control things, and and here's an example. Suddenly it crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me. So these are little things that's like, oh yeah, that guy's crazy. No, he's not any crazier than I am. But was I completely crazy? Not yet. We will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. He makes that very abundantly clear. And in his story, he says that too. And then he's got a chapter, the agnostic. So he's trying to soften us up a little bit to let a power greater than ourselves be part of it. He says, lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how we were to find this power, Well, when I came into AA, I had a lot of, I couldn't figure that out, that third step. I wasn't really that familiar with the whole book, I would read it, my pastor, did you read that? I was like, yeah. But I was staying, so he goes, but Bill, you've been sober for 2 years, and I was like, yeah, and I had a power greater than myself. I was, somehow or another, I had found that power. One of the things that, when I look back now, when I left that meeting, Bill had a white light experience. They talk about God comes to some people suddenly. I went down to that meeting hopeless, and when I left that meeting, I had hope, and that was a big deal. I just realized that a few years ago. I'm like, you know what? That was a really big deal. I didn't really think about it that way, and I think most people will, if they look back in their sobriety, will find a place where something like that happened, where I remember I was about 1.5 years sober, and I realized, I kind of feel okay. I was able to, I just felt like okay. I started to have some peace of mind, and that's so valuable, Bill Wilson, and that whole God thing is always, that's a big deal, and Bill knew that because it was a big deal for him, and then he had 100 guys when he wrote the book. He was able to observe, this, and these guys would come in, and he says, I could see their face drop when we talked of God, and all this stuff. And you hear people that say, I came into AA and this and that. I didn't know what the 12 steps were for a long time. I just looked up and was like, oh yeah, whatever. Oh yeah, I did that. I did. Yeah, okay, that's cool. I like the way Bill describes a spiritual awakening in the 12 and 12. And in step 12, he says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we practice these principles in all our affairs, and we carry the message. When you carry the message to another alcoholic, that's when you really learn and get this program. Don't ever deny yourself that. Don't ever leave here early, You stick around here, and you will get so much. I got so much out of AA this year. It's unbelievable. And you know what? Every year I feel that way. But I really did get a lot out this year. I realize, it takes me, he says, such a change, he says, such a change in attitude, when in the 10th step, he says, finally we begin to see that most people like ourselves are frequently wrong and suffering the pains of growing up, he says, so we have to look at them and with love and tolerance and whatnot. And he says, such a change may take time, maybe a lot of time. And I can tell you, for me, change keeps coming. I always get something good out of it. This year, I had to get thicker skin. I hated criticism. My wife criticizes me. I don't like. You say something to me, and I got to defend myself. And I finally let go of that this year. Well, more let it go. I find it. First it has to occur to me, and then God can help me, because I don't have the discipline to do it. And upon awakening, he says that, as we go through the day, we're trying to bring some God. I am so self-conscious, and so I'm trying to bring in some God consciousnesses. And one of the things that I I had a problem. I was like, what is God? They say, do God's will. I was like, what the hell's God's will? And then it occurred to me, it's the 11th step. I'm working for, now I think of it as like, you know what? When I get up in the morning, it's like, what are we doing today? I'm working for God. God's my boss. And what does he want me to do? Hey, be an instrument of my peace. All right? Where there is hatred, bring some, bring some, I can't be there. I need you to work for me. Okay? And so I have to become less self-centered and try and be more God conscious. And guess what? Then I feel good. And then, 7th step, he says, we ask God to remove these things from us when we discover what they are. In the beginning, we digest some big chunks of truth about ourselves, and we've made a good beginning, and it doesn't really ever end. But he says, never did we make character building our goal. It's like, and he talks about that, and I'm like, okay, yeah, you know what? And he says, humility, that 7th step, humility is, humbly asked him. And he says, the key ingredient of all humility is the desire to seek and do God's will. These are all things that I had nothing like this to go with, But in step 12, he talks about this, spiritual about God thing. He says, what do we mean by spiritual awakening? He says, maybe there's as many definitions of spiritual awakening as there are people who have had them. But certainly each genuine one has something in common with all the others. And the things that they have in common are not too hard to understand. When a man or a woman has a spiritual awakening, the most important meaning of it is that he has now become able to do, feel, and believe that which he could not do before on his unaided strength and resources alone. He has been granted a gift, and he uses that word gift like 3 times in this little explanation, which amounts to a new state of consciousness and being. He's been set on a path which tells him he's really going somewhere, that life is not a dead end, not something to be endured or mastered. In a very real sense, he's been transformed because he has laid hold of a source of strength which in one way or another he had denied himself. He finds himself in the possession of a degree of honesty, tolerance, unselfishness, peace of mind, and love of which he had thought himself quite incapable. What he has received is a free gift. Yet usually, at least in some small part, he has made himself ready to receive it. And AA's manner of making to receive that gift lies in the practice of the 12 steps, And that's why it's having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, I don't know, AA has been so valuable to me. One of the things my sponsor drilled in my head, too, is he goes, Billy, if you value something, you take care of it, And so, if I'm not grateful for AA, I damn well ought to be. And sometimes, I for a lot of times, maybe I take it for granted, this or that. But you know what? One of the things is, I've always had a sponsor. My sponsor was my sponsor for 34 years until he died. And then I got another sponsor. And he always went to meetings. I've always had a sponsor. I've always gone to meetings. I've always worked with others. And working with others, and when I have gotten into my big self-pity, someone would show up and it would get me out of it, And I heard at a meeting, and I hate this, but I'm going to share it with you. This lady one time, she says to me, self-pity is the highest form of selfishness. It's like, you bitch. And so now one of the things, and the last paragraph of the 12 and 12 too, he sums up. It's very powerful too. The 12th step in the 12 and 12 does the whole program. It's kind of good, to get a abbreviated thing. But he says these little studies of AA steps now come to a close, and we have been considering so many problems that it may appear that AA consists mainly of racking dilemmas and troubleshooting. To a certain extent, that is true. We've been talking about problems because we are a problem people who have found a way up and out and wish to share our knowledge with all who can use it. For it is only by accepting and solving our problems that we can get right with ourselves and the world about us, and with He who presides over us. Understanding is the key to right principles. That 4th and 5th step. When I understand my psychology, my psychoanalysis, when we do that psychoanalysis of ourselves with the sponsor and others, he goes, understanding is the key to right principles and attitudes, and right action is the key to good living. Therefore, the joy of good living is the theme of AA's 12 steps. And then he concludes the whole chapter with the Serenity Prayer. But I went to that meeting, and I got sober, and I stayed sober. I didn't understand the program that much, and the big book will meet you wherever you're at, and you're never going to outgrow the big book, And it's a wonderful study of our human nature. And as he says in the preface to the first edition, he says, besides which, we think everyone could benefit from our way of life, And our program has been thought of very highly. We have a guy in our group, and he says he went to the doctor, and the doctor says AA is the only thing that works. And that's kind of true. People do different things. But if you really want to have a good life, if you want to, I wanted to be good. I wasn't good, but I wanted to be good. I'm a lot better now than I was. I wasn't that great. I never had a relationship. It's funny. I was sober for quite some time, and I realized I never really had a relationship that was very long. I was like a 2-3 month guy at the most. And these girls would be like, I'd have them. I put on the Billy Show, and they'd think I was the greatest thing since sliced cheese or something like that, even in sobriety. And then I'd be gone. And it would hurt. It would hurt them. It would hurt me. But I did that. I repeated that over and over until I became aware. And my sponsor's like, Billy, don't you remember Betty Lou, Susie Ann, whatever, and then I started to realize, and one of the things in the fourth step, he spends a lot of time on the sex thing, and he says some people want more of this, some people want that, but one of the things is it's selfish, and so that's what I needed to understand more, was it selfish? Don't go there, And now, I've had a lot of close calls with screwing up my life. Remember Ann Landers? Anybody remember Ann Landers, the advice columnist? She had a book, and she would sell a book. It would say, 10 things that women do to screw up their marriage, life or whatever, And so in AA, I hear you guys talk about, I really learn from when you guys share. The beginner, and it doesn't matter how much time someone has. Quite often I get an awful lot from a guy who's starting to come alive. And that's what's so wonderful. Like I said before, I love watching people come alive. We had a girl in our group. She was nuts, and she looked nuts, and she was horrible. She was 17. She came out of a mental institution. I don't know why she was at our meeting, and she would rant and rave. I'd go out and smoke, come back in. She'd still be ranting and raving. I'd be like, oh my God. She was there for about a year or so. All of a sudden, that girl changed. And she got, she was like unemployed. She was like disabled mentally, She actually recovered and it was almost like, I was like, whoa, So it was worth it putting up with her. I look back now, it was worth it putting up with her, What else could I do, right? I'd go out and smoke and come back in. We'd have, and in AA, don't ever let anyone chase you out of AA. Sometimes people will come in, but they usually won't stay around if they're really that annoying, or they'll change. But true tolerance, and love of our fellows. There's no love quite like one alcoholic for another. We will do anything for another alcoholic. And I see that, and it's amazing. And the doctor, he says, if anyone's wondering why the head of the leading hospital for rehabilitation of addicts and alcoholics would comment on this book, he says, let them stand with us for a while on the firing line, and I'll not wonder why. He goes, we really haven't had that much success with these guys, but this altruistic movement that has grown up among them has been amazing, And he talks about, and he has a couple of cases that he talks about. He goes, the guy came in, and he despaired of ever, and this is how we feel. This is how it is, When I need a mental uplift, I often think of another case brought to me by a prominent physician in New York. The patient had made his own diagnosis, deciding his situation hopeless, had hid in a deserted barn, and tried to kill himself. He was rescued. Following his physical rehabilitation, he had a talk with the psychiatrist, which he frankly stated that he thought treatment was a waste of effort, unless he could assure him, as no one else had, that he would not, in the future, have the willpower to resist the impulse to drink. His alcoholic problem was so complex and his depression so great that we felt his only help would be through what we call then moral psychology. However, he did become sold on the ideas contained in this book, and he has not had a drink for a great many years. I see him now and then, and he is as fine a specimen of manhood as anyone could wish to meet. You know, and we see that. We see that if you hang around here, you see that happen. You know, and that is inspiring. What it was like, what happened, and what I'm like now. You know, these are powerful, powerful things that we get to participate in. You know, and as I do that, I get a little better, and I become a little less mentally irregular, but not completely. And that, my friends, is my story for tonight. Yeah.
Just for a second.
Yeah.
Stay up here.
Yeah.
As you all know, we're giving certificates to our speakers, and this is very special. Yes, you are. Officially certifiable. So, Billy, this is this you. And Billy didn't mention it, but Billy's sobriety date is September 21st.
22nd.
22nd.
But who's counting?
1984. And so he's been around for a minute. And thank you for coming down.
We in our group here, we had a guy, and we did this. We had a guy, and he was so freaking humble. He would clean up after everything. He was best, and so we decided to give him a medal, and it said "Most Humble," and he wore it to the meeting the next week, and we took it away from him.
Let me see your big book. No, I really appreciate it. Let's give another round of applause for Billy. Really appreciate that. And man, he mentioned so many things, and I really appreciate the fact that back in the day we would have called Billy a big book thumper. And in Las Vegas, I learned from people like him. And if you know, I have a propensity for the big book, and I memorize pages and everything because I want to know what saved my life. And if you're new, relatively new, I want to read you to page 17, which is my favorite page of the big book. And Billy said some things that were really reminiscent of my early recovery. Matter of fact, I went and saw this one guy that I didn't like at the end of the conversation as much as I liked before the conversation, but it was another failed relationship. And I had a string of them. And I was trying to tell him how it was this girl's fault, right? Like all the rest of them. And he said to me, you don't have relationships, you take hostages. And I stormed out of his office, and I came back a few minutes later and apologized. I said, "You're absolutely right," and that's what we do oftentimes. So recovery and AA as a whole helps us overcome these things. And if you're new or relatively new, this is a program that is God-centered. However, just as Bill's experience on page 12 of the Big Book, that your conception of God can be whatever you want it to be. And the difference between AA and standard religion is in the LDS Church and the Charismatic Church and the Catholic Church and Jewish won't even tell you, a different God, different Christ. They'll define who God is. What's great about Alcoholics Anonymous, and one thing I really appreciate, even though I am a Christian, you can have whatever belief you want. And as long as that God, whoever you choose, insists that you enjoy life, is a God that will get you to be happy, joyous, and free, there's no one who should have a problem. If they have a problem with you, come and talk to me, and they'll have a problem with me. Trust me on that. Because if God is not who you need God to be, then God is nothing. And if you need God to recover, which we do according to the program of the Big Book, then God needs to be whoever you are comfortable with God being. because it's you and your personal relationship with your higher power that will make the difference in your life. I want to read page 17 to you, and then we'll do the promises in the Lord's Prayer. We of Alcoholics Anonymous know of thousands of men and women who were just once as hopeless as Bill. Nearly all have recovered. They have solved the drink problem. We are average Americans. All sections of this country and many of its occupations are represented, as well as many political, economic, social, and religious backgrounds. We are people who normally would not mix, but there exists among us a fellowship, a friendliness, and an understanding which is indescribably wonderful. We are like the passengers of a great liner when, moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. Unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy and escape from disaster does not subside as we go our own individual ways. The feeling of having shared in a common peril is one element in the powerful cement which now binds us, but that in itself would have not held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact for every one of us is that we have discovered a common solution. We have a way out in which we can absolutely agree and join in brotherly, harmonious action. This is the great news this book carries to those who suffer from alcoholism. And stay for the fellowship. Stay long enough for the fellowship to keep you here so the program of recovery can get you well. And that's how this thing works. And I really appreciate everyone who's come back every week. And thank you for your cooperation and your support of this meeting. Ricardo, Michelle, Whitney, and I appreciate that very, very much. And these are the promises from page 83 and 84 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feelingness of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. Are these extravagant promises? We think not. They are being fulfilled amongst us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly. They will always materialize if we work for them. Join me in the Lord's Prayer as we close this meeting out. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Thank you very much for being here. We'll see you next